Welcome to the Monday, February 7th, 2011 City Council Informational. We'll call the meeting to order. If you notice, Councilors Erpenbach and Aguilar and Anderson are all absent today and for tonight's meeting. They are attending official city business at an economic development conference, so they will be absent. We'll go on to our City Council staff report with Deborah A. Owen, City Clerk, Chief of Council Operations. Deborah?
Thank you and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. For tonight's 7 o'clock agenda, there are no amendments that we are aware of, and so this would be simply just a straightforward vote on each of these items. As you see, if you have questions, please consult your electronic agenda because some of those details, especially with the appointment of the citizen boards, all of that information, including a little bio on each of those citizens, is available on your via your laptop, but on the electronic agenda at siouxfalls.org. And just you'll just need to click on that item on the agenda, just the title, and onto the right-hand side of your computer screen, you will be able to see all of those attachments and click on the ones you would like to look at. And if I could, just a point of privilege, last week, one of our internal auditors, Tim Boozman, he and his lovely wife Heidi had a brand new baby girl, and we just wanted to welcome Lily Charlotte Boozman, and hopefully she'll grow up and be a great government employee down the road. But just congratulations to Tim and to Heidi. Thank you.
Very good. Congratulations to Tim and his wife. Any other comments or questions for Deborah? Seeing none, we'll move into our City Council open discussion. Councilor Brown.
We were scheduled to have a Fiscal Committee meeting following this informational. I am canceling that for a couple of reasons. We're, of course, missing a member today, but also we were getting a lot of documents late in the day today. And I would just remind city staff that for committee hearings, we need that information on Friday. For those of us that work full-time, it's too difficult to get through those documents before we get to this meeting and make any heads or tails of them. So I'm canceling it today, but I'm looking at some future dates, and for the committee members, Tom Huber wants the Fiscal Committee to review new financial land management software through a video conference at the Health Department, and so I will send those dates out to the Fiscal Committee. Probably what we'll do is either have our Fiscal Committee meeting on contracts before or after that, and we'll have to do the video conferencing over at the Health Department. But I'll send those dates out and see what works for everyone.
Any questions for Councilor Brown on that topic? Councilor Brown, if I could add a comment on the in the minutes, we had a request from Councilor Rolfing. It asked to get a list of the total number of contracts that the city enters into. Did we ever get that list?
Deborah, I don't think we have we?
I think there was there was some information that came from Scott Rest that we shared, so I don't know if it addressed that. Since that was shared at that committee, I'm guessing it was an additional list. But I'm not sure. I've not received anything nor been a part of an email on that trail.
I think what we were trying to narrow down was the total number of contracts.
If I could, then again, that information was made available at committee last time, and I can simply forward that on to you again. That came from Scott. I think there was one of the numbers was about between 900 and 1,000 contracts a year, contracts and agreements. Pardon me. Which were interchangeable, I think. Thank you.
Yes, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our office will be compiling a list of the types of agreements that have regularly come before the council, and we should have that to the council members in the next few days.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilor Rolfing, that gives you what you needed? Okay, very good. Any other City Council open discussions? Councilor Intamin.
I had the opportunity to attend the mayor's listening session with Chief Hill was there, along with my little buddy here to the left. And the venue at Hy-Vee is, while it's nice to be open to the public like that, it really is not an ideal venue. I think we should talk to the mayor about that. People are there having breakfast. They're not really there to listen to the mayor or to any of our city people. And quite honestly, it would have been nice if we could have moved that upstairs so that we could hear it. It becomes very hard, even with a small PA system that we had, to hear what is being said. So I'd like to encourage the mayor to kind of look at those venues a little bit. A number of people were there for input, and it was very hard to hear. And I don't think it does those folks that are there making a presentation. It's not the best situation. So I'd like to have them look at that, if he would, a little bit.
Certainly, Councilor Aguilar and myself will share that with the mayor next time we meet with him. But if there's anybody here from the mayor's staff that would like to relay that information to him, that'd be great and helpful. But Karen or Jill, I don't see Sue, but great. We'll make sure that message gets delivered. Councilor Litz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also point out that if you do show up on a whim like Councilor Enneman did, you may be handed the microphone if the question is pertinent.
Okay.
And I was up for the challenge, by the way.
Okay, very good. Any other City Council open discussion items? Seeing none, we'll move on to our presentations. We'll start off with our Capital Improvement Program audit from Rich Oaksall, our lead internal auditor. Welcome, Rich.
Good afternoon, City Council. Rich Oaksall, Internal Audit. We're going to give a brief summary of our CIP audit report that we shared with the Audit Committee a few weeks ago. As you're probably aware, CIP is the largest process of the city. Last year, the total capital program was $85 million, and that included not only the CIP, but also the OSEP program. Now, this audit was not exhaustive. If we had looked at every aspect of CIP, we could have been auditing for a year and had a 100-page report, so we kind of limit our scope in a few cases. But I think we came up with a number of recommendations that, in our opinion, will increase the transparency and increase effectiveness and efficiency of the process. CIP consists of the land acquisition, infrastructure, buildings, improvements to facilities, etc. And the OSEP is the vehicles and the capital equipment. And as I said, we focused on the CIP. Next one. We found compliance with city charter, state law, and executive orders. We did have specific recommendations that's in your hard copy, which each of you should have on pages 6 through 15. The first recommendation we had involved that monthly report that you received from the Finance Department, and there's a couple of pages in the report that deal with the CIP project status. We recommended that management revise some of those codes under the status column to make them a little bit clearer. And management had concurred with that recommendation. Next. We recommended that the CIP fund transfers, also on that monthly report, include a column so that you could tell what the original budget was for that project and what the current budget is, because as we'll see, there can be many transfers of money back and forth between projects, and we thought that would increase the transparency, and management did agree with that recommendation. So. We had a comment about the project capitalization. We believed it could be more consistent. We did find examples of projects where the capitalization, in our opinion, did not appear consistent with the four criteria of the city capitalization policy. And our recommendation was that management review the policy and make it more specific as to what is a major renovation, in other words, what gets capitalized and what would be minor and gets expensed. And we're planning to meet with finance to discuss that and kind of hammer that out. So we'll be kind of following up on that recommendation. So we did have a recommendation about the project closeout. We believed it needed to happen faster so that available funds could be reprogrammed to projects that needed funding. We looked at the August financial report from last year, and we followed 36 projects on that report that were labeled as complete, at their status as complete, and they had available balances totaling $668,000. Management would point out that there is work that needs to be done after a project is substantially complete. There's a warranty period. There can be a punch list. and their comments are on the last 2 pages of the report. And when we get done with the presentation, if you have questions for management, I noticed Mark Cotter's here from Public Works, and I'm sure he'll be happy to address that recommendation with you. Between February of 2009 and October of 2010, there's about a 21-month period there. We noted that $40 million had been transferred between general ledger accounts, and that works out to about $2 million per month on average was being transferred between general ledger accounts. Some of the transfers were from a completed project to an incomplete project that needed additional funding. However, the majority that we looked at, about 73%, involved transfers between 2 incomplete projects. For example, there was one project that had the funding approved in 2008. There was not much work done in 2008 or 2009 on that project. The funds were almost completely transferred away in 2009. And then in 2010, the funding was transferred back to the project along with an additional amount over the original budget. So that was just one example of what we're talking about. So we did note that there were transfers between unrelated projects, which we thought changed the City Council's approved intent for those funds. We recommended that only transfers from the completed projects occur. Any transfers involving shifting of funds from incomplete projects we believe should have City Council approval rather than simply a notification, as is the case right now. We had a recommendation about making the project description more specific. There's a number of pooled projects in the CIP plan that are used to fund projects that are related, but for example, the arterial street expansion have a related purpose, but different specific projects. The pooled projects give little detail as to how the money will be spent. And our recommendation was that management more clearly define some of their projects. We recommend limiting the use of the pooled projects. We understand that pooled projects will be necessary in certain circumstances. We asked that if it would be possible that management could submit a list to the council as soon as they knew which projects they intended to fund that year. Another recommendation dealt with the prioritization of the CIP projects. Currently, the way it is, when you get that plan every year, they're prioritized within the department. For example, the park section will have their projects from 1 to whatever prioritized. However, there's no overall prioritization. We thought that would be a good idea in cases where we have infinite needs and limited resources, that it would be a good idea to have an overall list of priorities, especially for the second penny for Fund 253. When there's years where the revenue is less than anticipated and it's necessary to hold back on projects, we thought it'd be a good idea to have identified those projects ahead of time. Overall, the ones that you considered the most important. And we thought the City Council could help management by providing either policy or other direction to management so that they would be guided in submitting a list to the City Council for approval. The last 2 pages of your hard copy are the management responses. That's on Appendix 2. And as I said, we did have agreement on several recommendations. We did have some disagreement on other recommendations, but we intend to work with management and Fiscal Committee as necessary to discuss the proposed changes. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer those for you.
Any questions for Rich? If perhaps we could get somebody from the administration to just talk a little bit about the, is Tom Huber there? Tom, on the monthly financial report, some of the revisions that were identified or recommendations, could you outline your thoughts and maybe explain a little bit to us about those changes?
We did take a good look at the audit recommendations, and several of them were basically on how to report data, and we're always looking for ways that we can improve and add clarity to the information we provide. We want to make sure we provide clear and concise information and yet not overwhelm the reader with too many details. But we looked at those recommendations, and we added some codes for our plan to add some codes with this year's report to help better identify what the project status is. So those should help in giving a better indication of where each of those projects are, realizing this is a large plan, there's a lot of projects, and so want to make sure we're as clear as possible on each of those projects. And then also on the transfers, we're looking at how we can add a column to that report, not make it too small, but yet fit it on the page and still make that work. So we will look at those reporting recommendations and make improvements as we can.
I would say if you could reach out to the Fiscal Committee as well
Certainly.
to maybe lay out an example of how that might look and look for their input on how it, winds up, at least before you present to the whole council. That'd be helpful, I think.
That'd be great. Yes.
Maybe any other questions? I have another one, maybe on the, and I'm not sure who needs to answer it, who can, I guess, but kind of looking towards Mark maybe, but I don't know. The idea that, we covered a lot of this in our audit committee meeting, and I'm just bringing some of this up for further discussion with the rest of the council. When there's a project that's created and almost all of the money is transferred out of it into another project and used to complete another project or fund that other project, I need help putting these things together on why we would ever do that and why that's good for the City of Sioux Falls to continue doing that, and or is there a change needed here that would help either add transparency to the whole process or just some knowledge of why you're doing that. Anybody feel inclined to help us out there?
Good
Thanks,
afternoon.
Mark
Cotter with the Office of Public Works. I think what I could do, and I think we just collectively recognize that since 2008 and 2009, now 2010, we've seen changes with the revenues that have come into the city. So naturally, we have to make sure that we execute the plan and try to build those most prioritized projects. I think what we could do, maybe just to add some clarity, is to look at some of those cases that Rich and his team identified in 2009, and we can path you through why some of those decisions were made, but without having an appropriate documentation. I mean, I'd certainly be willing to come back and show that. The key with, I think, the majority of the transfers do come in two key projects, which is Arterial Street expansion and then now Major Street reconstruction. And the key is just to allow us to, and I think the discussions that we've had to date on not only just listing some of the key projects, but actually listing them in priority as we have those discussions with council, and then our intent would be to build them based on that priority. But if something were to fall out of sort, whether we had a private utility issue or a property acquisition issue, that we would come and make that aware to you. So anyway, there is, with the bid results that get sent over every week, and we'll have another bid letting this week, with the transfers that are in the back of the book, if there's some clarity that we can do to actually tie those two together in addition to the monthly financial report, we're more than open to trying to do that to just provide more communication on the capital plan. Here.
Councilor Intiman.
I think that, excuse me, Mark, I think that is important, especially when you have like 4 new people on the council, not used to quite understanding what's happened in the past, and us being able to identify why those changes are being made. It just makes sense. I think we use the example of a project, you start a project, it's like you open up a new checkbook, and I think Councilor Jameson brought that up, and it makes sense to see, as you spend the money, the checkbook goes down, and when the project is over with, there's money left, it should be transferred back in. Then upon request, we make the necessary appropriations upon request down the road. So I guess it's just trying to understand that stuff, having it prioritized, and you just being open with us and explaining to us what's going on so we have a better understanding. I think that's key.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Mark, for stepping up. Any other comments or thoughts on this report from Rich? Seeing none, thank you, Rich. We'll move on to our next presentation, In-Home Family Daycare Inspectors by Jill Franken. Jill, welcome.
Good afternoon. Jill Franken with the Health Department. I am pleased that we're able to come back to you today and talk some more about family daycare inspections and that process and what we have learned over the past couple of months. I would like to introduce Alicia Kalura to you. She's our Assistant Health Director of Operations as of mid-December and will give the first part of this presentation. As well, Luann Ford is here and Paul Bankford from the Attorney's Office, if there are any questions for them. So I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Hello, Alicia. Welcome.
Hi. Good afternoon, council members. As Jill said, I'm here to present the first portion of the PowerPoint presentation just to introduce a little bit of history regarding family daycare and what brings us here to speak with you today. You may recall that in October of 2010, Jill and Luann went through several points with the council, including the history of the daycare ordinance and the changes and revisions that we've seen since 2004, the health department's desire to have a presence in the family daycare home to ensure a minimum standard of safety that parents can rely on, also introducing our plan to perform in-home family daycare inspections. And finally, we identified that we would be coming back to you for an ordinance revision requiring that those inspections be posted in the family daycare home. We shared with you again in October of 2010 some basic statistics. For instance, in 2010, the number of family in-home daycares was 426. And we also shared that we receive a number of complaints every year, and that number for 2010 was 54. Just to characterize the kind of complaints that we do receive at the health department, many of them are regarding too many children or perceived too many children in the home, some type of unsafe condition or hazardous exposure potential for children, and then also a lot of questions regarding if a provider is actually registered. In fact, 50% of the complaints we receive are regarding whether a provider has an appropriate registration with the city. So knowing that we had a number of complaints and that our complaints were growing, we wanted to create a plan to challenge our current policies and procedures to include an inspection process in addition to the investigations that we were doing. And those investigations were threefold. One, the pre-opening inspections that would occur prior to any children being received in that daycare home. Post-opening, that would be approximately 30 days after the pre-opening inspection, but that would be unannounced. And then finally, inspections in response to complaints that we were receiving at the health department. Our goals for creating this plan was to provide the operators or the providers with the education and the clarification regarding the city requirements. Having the inspector in the home, going through the process and the inspection with that provider allows a conversation to take place between the inspector and the provider so that they can educate them as to the requirements of the city and how to obtain the various articles that are needed to provide care. Also, we wanted to provide parents with another avenue to assess a family daycare. We do encourage parents to be the front line of defense when they are selecting a family daycare, but we also think that a registration and an inspection process supports the parents in their decision making. So we started at step one, which is just developing an inspection process and a form to go along with that. This form is hard to read in a PowerPoint, but it mirrors exactly what is in our city ordinance, which is do the providers and the helpers and others who frequent the home, have they been appropriately screened against the Federal Registry of Abuse and Neglect, against the Sex Offender Registry, and have they been screened for a felony criminal history? What are the ages of the children, and are the ratios being met? Have the providers and the helpers all completed the education requirements? Is that registration clearly posted in the home? And finally, a myriad of safety items are checked, including just basic protection from hot surfaces, ensuring that firearms, pharmaceuticals, and other hazardous materials are inaccessible to children. So what we have on this slide is just a result of the inspections that we have been performing since October of 2010. Based on our criteria, we've done 19 inspections. 8 of those were pre-opening, 8 post-opening, and 3 were began through a complaint with the health department. What we found were there were various findings. Some included needing to secure hazardous materials, or perhaps a helper wasn't quite along in the registration process as the actual provider was, so we provided assistance in facilitating that. It is worthy to note that the 3 complaint-based inspections did not result in a violation of city ordinance. In fact, the vast majority of violations that we do see are mitigated right at the time of inspection. If we do have an issue that's of more concern, we are able to follow up with that provider and ensure that the provisions of the ordinance are being followed at a later date. So having given you just a little bit of history and where we are in our inspection process, I would like to reintroduce Jill, who will complete our presentation and discuss how we are meeting our goals and some of the goals that we're considering for the future in regards to family daycare.
Thanks, Alicia. Well, our next steps, as we work through this next phase of providing more information, more substance to parents as it relates to their family daycare. Luann and her team have been working hard to refine the form that we're using. It's been a work in progress, and that's some of what we've been doing over the last couple months is using a template that we've drafted that they've taken out and used and worked with and then revised again, and they're finally getting to a format that works well. But then you also have to look at how do you translate that information into meaningful information that's posted for parents. They want to be able to read that in a way that it makes sense to them, and what makes sense to us in our world may not be the same as what makes sense to them. So they've been working hard to develop how to get that information posted in a meaningful way, as well as use the form consistently each time they go in to do an inspection. We've also been working as a team, all of us, quite frankly, to look at our policies and procedures, algorithms, workflows, all the things that go into doing this work consistently and effectively and making whatever changes are necessary internally. And then we also have been working with the attorney's office on updating the language for you all to regard as it relates to posting of those inspections. So with that, how have we done? Have we been working through and getting more towards our goal, our end goals? And I would say, do we provide new providers with education and clarification on requirements? Yes, I think we're working towards that. We have the pre-opening inspection that will educate providers that prior to starting a daycare, it'll be a less intensive time for them when they don't have children in their care yet. Hopefully their window of learning will be more open because they'll be pending that to begin, and we will look for those things that they need to be reminded of, or at least give them great assurance that they're ready to go, which we expect will probably be the case most of the time. We'll then do an unannounced opening inspection sometime within that first 30 days, but certainly we don't want them to know we're coming. And so then we'll be able to ascertain if truly they're carrying through with the things that they had been indicated are necessary and part of the minimum for being registered. And certainly then that gives us an opportunity to reinforce, re-educate, and if needed, follow up again with another inspection down the road if we are a little bit concerned whether or not they really understand all of the requirements that are theirs to own. And certainly then we will do inspections based on when we get complaints to our office. You know, we certainly have an investigation process with every complaint that comes to our department, but this is also then a uniform and usual and customary addition to that of something that we'll do on a consistent basis. Every complaint that comes in we treat as if it's unique and different, but then the inspection itself will provide us with some continuity in when we enter the home, along with investigating the complaint itself. And also, what we're going to do is work very closely with Child Protection and police, as we always have. We've had a really good relationship with them, but certainly will, again, if we see something that isn't necessarily a violation of our ordinance that we have the power to enforce, we are certainly there to see if there are other things that should be of concern to Child Protection or Police Department, and be very proactive, as we always have, in referring those particular findings to them. And then as for number 2, if you want to go back, yeah, thanks. Do we provide parents with another avenue to assess the daycare provider? Yes, we're working on that as well. The revision to the ordinance will require them to post those at their daycare. And we also have been working very hard to develop what is meaningful information that we can post online. And one of the things that we intend to have in place when this ordinance becomes official or enacted is to also have a searchable web page where they can go in and enter a first and last name of their provider, or enter by registration number. And with that, then they will be able to see the things, whether or not they have an active registration and whether or not there has been an inspection done on them. We feel really good about this process. It isn't the end of the line for what we're going to do on that website, surely, but it is the next step that we have in place. So, with that, then, the next step, we've identified another goal in this last couple months, and that is to strengthen the enforcement of our unregistered providers. As Alicia alluded to, that in 2010 we had 54 complaints regarding providers, and of those complaints, about 27 or 50% of them were related to questions about whether or not a provider was registered. And what we found is that a significant number of them indeed were not registered and yet providing family daycare. We feel like we do a really good job in trying to find these folks. We use very creative means of being able to do so, but we also rely on the public to help us with that. So once we have that knowing of what we're dealing with statistically and what we think is data that we want to act upon, we have put plans in place and have been working with the City Attorney's Office, and they've been great to work with us to strengthen our enforcement process of unregistered providers. Right now, what we currently do is we provide them a notice of violation, and then we give them a very defined period of time in which they need to complete that registration process. I have been adamant about working on the idea of, when necessary, we also give them a citation. We are putting children potentially in a unsafe situation when they have not met the registration requirements like everyone else. Those over 400 daycare providers that are registered within our city. And so when they are not registered, we need to be able to take more strict action on them to encourage them. And it also then that then becomes public also information that we will then post on our website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, what we are going to do is if we do issue a citation, it will be required for them to post that on the door of their daycare and keep that posted for the entire length of time in which they're becoming registered, so that parents have that information right away and immediately available to them, that currently they're taking their children to a person who is not registered with the City of Sioux Falls. And then we'll continue to be very strict about that requirement of when they need to become registered and keep a close eye on them. We haven't certainly worked through all of those logistics, but we're working on our policies and procedures to make sure we're staying in close contact with them as well in that regard. And lastly, of course, there are going to be those rare times when we find that someone has, for whatever reason, not been eligible to become registered with the city. Or at one point they were and they no longer are registered. That would be a situation where we would immediately ask them to cease operations and assure that they are doing so, and work continuously with them to make sure that they're not providing that daycare opportunity at their home. So, the next steps. we will be bringing ordinance language. As you can see, what we have drafted here is actually quite simple. We're doing a cleanup of saying instead of a home daycare, it's called a family daycare home for purposes of the ordinance language. And then one sentence added to Section 19-132 that the most recent family daycare, home daycare inspection by the health department must be displayed in plain view within the family daycare home. So that is what we'll be bringing to you. Our timeline is to do that on February 22nd for first reading, March 7th for second reading, and be in place then at the end of that month and into April with this, with what we have shared with you. We anticipate, based on history, that we'll probably do about 64 inspections in this next year, with calendar, or I should say full year. Given what we've done historically, that doesn't sound like a lot. So we really, it is just one tool. Parents have to exercise their parental responsibility as well, and we cannot emphasize that enough, that they have to every day be looking when they drop their kids off, when they pick their kids up, make unannounced visits themselves, just like we would do unannounced inspections, and they should be asking to be able to see any part of that home or ask whatever questions they feel are necessary to feel good about their child's experience. We are also working with the State Department of Child Services to strengthen and Child Protection to strengthen our memorandum of agreement with them so that we have a closer working relationship with them, and we're getting close to that agreement as well, and the Attorney's Office has been working with us on that. We also are looking at some best practices. We've been really having some engaging conversations with the State Department of Child Services, and they've been helping us with some listservs they have available to them, and we've been looking actually nationally on what are some best practices, what are others doing, what would we want to benchmark ourselves against moving forward. One of the caveats to that, though, is that most of that is the states are doing that work rather than municipalities, so we have to take that all into consideration moving forward, but the states also interested in when information is being provided as well. And then we'll work also with our community stakeholders. We've been working very closely with folks to know what everyone is thinking about this, whether it be providers or parents. We've gotten feedback from quite a few folks, especially the providers, on what we should be doing, what they think is good to be doing, and they're very encouragingly supportive of the inspection process at this point in time. We'll also work with the 211 helpline. We'll engage with them on whatever we can provide on their website and whatever they can also provide to us that can be on our website, because really they are the avenue in this community to be able to identify which daycares are available, and they only provide registered daycares on their website, registered or licensed daycares, and so you have to be able to show evidence to be able to put yourself on that website. So we'll continue to work closely with them, and then educating the public through Channel 16, through whatever methods on our website, and whatever that we can do to continue this work moving forward. That's what we have for you.
Any questions for Jill or anybody else? Councilor Brown.
Jill, you and I received a lot of emails regarding addresses of home daycares on the city's website. Can you more specifically address how that would be handled for protection?
Sure. At this point, this next step is going to be allowing someone who, I am a parent new to the community, and I've been doing my homework, and I perhaps have gone on the 211 helpline, or I've talked with people I know, and I've found some names of some daycare providers that I want to know more about. This, it would be intended that then you would take those names, you'd go in, you'd enter the first name and the last name and pop up the information. It wouldn't be that you would get a laundry list of all of that information at this time. Certainly we'll consider, what we need to do with the next steps down the road, but that is how it's intended at this point in time. If you call in, we'll certainly also be able to give you that information if you give us names of daycares that you'd like to know more about.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Rolfing?
Yeah, I had a number of things that I wrote down.
Okay.
This is really interesting, especially since we are a community of working moms, working parents, both sets. And so it just seemed to me, you said there were 54 complaints last year. You said that 50% of them were registered, or 50% of them were for unregistered daycare providers. How many of the other 27 were there any real serious ones that we should, or what kind of percent was that? Was it very few, or if any? Hopefully there were none.
I'm going to have Luann Ford come up and just
Okay.
talk a little bit more about those. Would you?
Thank you. I'm Luann Ford. I am Public Health Manager for the Health Department. To answer your question regarding the complaints that we receive regarding daycare providers in Sioux Falls, like you say, about 50% of the complaints that have come in have been in regards to whether or not a provider is actually registered. Of the other 50% is what you're asking? The other 50% ranges from complaints such as quality of care to hazardous situations, hazardous conditions in the home. What we will be doing, what we've always done, is an investigation. We would always go out and do an investigation to see whether or not there was any violation of city ordinance. Now we will also be doing an inspection along with that investigation. And if there is not a violation of city ordinance, so that's like, for instance, the city ordinance doesn't necessarily cover quality of care issues, but there are other agencies that do. And so then we would be forwarding those complaints on to those other agencies for investigation.
Okay. Can you tell me, maybe you're the one to answer this, registration process and the timeline? You say if you run into someone who is not registered, that's half the battle right there, it seems like, because if they know what they are supposed to do and not supposed to do by being registered, it probably takes care of half the battle. You run into someone who is not registered, what kind of, you mentioned a timeline, what kind of timeline do they have, and what is the process? Is it extensive? Is it a weekend kind of, or a 8-hour process, whatever?
Sure. The timeline for becoming registered, 50% of the complaints are regarding registration of providers. Then of that, a portion of those don't require to be registered. They're grandparents taking care of children or their grandchildren, or a babysitting situation where, I'm just watching my neighbor's children for a couple hours, so that was not a violation. And then you move on to the providers that are indeed operating a daycare and they are not currently registered. And what we do is we, at this point, give a notice of violation, giving 5 days to make application, and 30 days to become fully registered. And the reason why there's so much time involved with that is because there's screening processes, and so they have to send away for a felony screening, for an abuse and neglect screening, and the turnaround time is sometimes lengthy for that. We find that the actuality of it, how long does it actually take, can be anything in a few days turnaround to up to the month.
What is the training process for the registration? Is there a class they go to, or what?
No, it's been a one-on-one training. What we do is we have an inspector who actually goes to the door and talks to them about it and walks them through the process.
Okay.
And then we have a packet of information we provide as well.
How much, Jill, how much staff do you have for this?
Well, Luann Ford manages the program, and then there are 2 inspectors that part of their work responsibility is overseeing the inspection process and responding to any complaints and investigating those complaints as they come in.
And you're looking at 64 inspections, which really means 32, because you're going back to them 30 days within the next 30 days. So you're going to get around everybody about a year, every other year is about what it amounts to if everything grows.
Yeah, that would be close. 32. It probably will be a little bit. Let's see, I'm doing my math quick in my head. A little bit more than 32 because some of them will be maybe single inspections that are on a complaint basis, and we don't find we get a complaint. And we go in, we do the inspection, and we can't find anything that
Right.
can validate that.
Okay.
So it might be a little bit more than 30.
So about
yeah.
every 2 years, they need to expect one.
That would
Yeah.
probably be fair to say.
Okay. I think it was wonderful that you included your, the daycares that you know are doing things right in putting that form together and getting things set up, because that's where you need to go to get the proper, criterion set up and things. That's a wonderful way to do it. So I applaud you that, and I
Great.
applaud you with what you're doing here. It's great. It'll help protect our kids and make sure that they have a good experience in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Any other questions? Jill, if I could maybe,
Yes.
I'm just trying to think of, Sioux Falls has a lot of people who are coming here to work. Sioux Falls is growing when other communities are shrinking. And if I was a young father with some young children and I was moving to Sioux Falls, I would hope to find on a website that the city might have that have all registered daycare providers, a list of those things. And I know you're a little sensitive to some of the details that you can include on that, but maybe when you develop that website further, include some, and I think maybe you hinted at this, some best practices for parents to consider while they select a daycare provider, the right questions to ask, stop in and make an inspection on their own, spend a day with their child, do some of those things to help a parent who doesn't know anybody in our city start off with the right daycare provider. Is that part of what you're hoping to do with your website?
I think you're, alluding to what we'll continue to look at next. It's interesting because there are what you can find through various good websites that are valid and trusted websites. We've been able to find some preliminary information about what other states are doing, and then with the state child care services being able to put out on a listserv, what are you all doing? We found even more information. But what I found, what we take when we're looking at any improvement, we really want to look at what's our outcome we're trying to achieve, and then what's the best way to get there. If truly that, what you just described, is the best way to get there and can be considered a valid effort and a valid use that people will use to actually be able to make good decisions, I think that's what we're trying to ascertain next. I went on one website that I can't remember what state it was, but when I went in to look at whether they posted all of their child care inspection or registered child care providers online, when I went in, the count ticked from 0 to 1 when I went in. I don't know how often they redo their count, but when we do that, it's usually more than just a 1 day or a 1 week. So it makes me wonder how many people take advantage of those means and methods. And so that was interesting to me when I went in there and saw that. And so I would hope that whatever we do is something that will be meaningful for our families moving forward. But that is one we're wrestling with, yes. Yes.
Councilor Brown.
Jill, 464 registered today. Is that the right number?
It's pretty
Something
close.
like pretty close. How many do we estimate that are out there that are not registered today? Do we have any estimate?
I wouldn't want to guess, but
What can we do to encourage them to register without being punitive, and making that process as easy as possible so we get a larger number of them registered as we go into redoing this ordinance?
More education, certainly. The more we can get the information out to the public, the better. Because the more we can sooner find out from someone that someone's unregistered, so they've been able to get that information more easily available to them, that it's required to be registered, that the parents themselves understand that better, because that is still a frequent occurrence where a parent wouldn't have even known that their in-home family daycare providers should have been registered. So certainly education is one of the key pieces, and having that readily available in lots of different formats is what we're hoping to be able to do. And I think working with the 211 helpline will be another really good avenue, and they've extended themselves to us to be able to work on this. So in the past, Councilor Brown, that's been a really good partnership to work through, and as we've looked at daycare ordinance, so I think we'll use them as well.
So there are undoubtedly daycare providers out there that don't know that they need to be registered with the city. They see a story now. What happens when they call you tomorrow and say, I'm not registered, I'm providing services? What will your office be doing to help them get registered?
Well, we'll just get them the first step, and that's getting the application to them and working that through. That's the next thing we'll do, and we hope we get some calls.
Councilor Rolfing.
An idea for that might be, we have a tremendous amount of kids on subsidized or free lunches. Maybe you could work with the school system to send a card home. Maybe you're doing that already with the kids to say, is your daycare registered? Daycare provider registered?
You bet.
I don't think the school district allows cards to go home anymore.
Oh. Well, they might if it's from the city.
Councilor Litz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jill, I've been, in on this we've been doing this a couple of years, and even before that. Mm-hmm. And, I think that some folks would like a solution to this, and here's what we're going to do, and it will work. But I think that, like you said, the answer is ongoing education and ongoing effort. I think we're in a protracted thing here. It's not going to be something we're going to have a solution to that's going to work for all times, all the time. I think a lot of daycare providers, I know a few instances where the gal started out taking care of their nieces and nephews and made a few bucks, and just kind of expanded there, and they didn't mean it to be, but pretty soon it's out of hand. And I also think that sometimes daycare providing in this town, some people regard it as about with the same thing that they would have for having a rummage sale. You know what I'm saying? They just don't take it. It's not that big a deal. I'm going to take care of some kids for a little while, but it is a big deal. So I don't think that, we're going to find a solution for it. I don't think that it's just going to be an ongoing thing, And I've also said this before, and you said it in the beginning, if I'm looking for daycare and I walk up to the door and a three-legged cat walks out, runs out the door when the door gets open, and there's a dog chewing on a baby bottle in the recliner and the TV's on too loud and there's trash in the corner, I'm not going to let my kids go there. And somewhere in here, the parents have to figure this out. And I realize that there's some situations with some working moms out there that they're desperate for this thing to happen, and there's just not going to be an easy answer for this. So thanks for doing what you do, and you're just going to have to keep it up for a long time. And like I said, there's no easy answer for this. So.
Thank you.
One other question was the language you have for the, if you could go to the proposed language for the ordinance, that the recent inspection by the health department must be displayed in plain view within the family daycare home. Are you going to give in your training and education process examples of where plain view is for some of those parents?
Well, certainly we'll also be in the home doing that inspection, so we'll indicate very specifically where we think that should be posted. So, yes, absolutely.
And then I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but if a couple pointed questions, maybe if once the city does inspect a daycare center and something happens after that inspection that is just horrible, does the city have any liability in that process at all? Once they've inspected it and maybe signed off and said, yep, you're good to go, and then something terrible happens, where does the city fall in that?
What I can say is we can inspect for those things that are within our ordinance, and when we find those things, we will do the corrective action necessary. Certainly that's a point-in-time inspection, and there could always be something that could be a week from that day of that inspection and the corrective action being implemented, something that changes. As far as our liability, I think we have a couple folks in here that could answer that question better than I.
Dave Feifley, if you like, or you've got somebody here? Why don't you
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd have Paul Bangford, Assistant City Attorney, answer that question. He's been dealing with this issue.
Hi, Paul Bangford, Assistant City Attorney. Counselor, in response to your question, there's always some liability to the city when issues like this are addressed, and I understand the concern in terms of we do an inspection and something comes up later. I can't tell you that there won't be a situation where the city could be sued or the city could be, somebody could pursue the city. The question is, though, whether we're doing what we can to inspect and to make every effort that we can to make sure a home is safe. I guess we're also potentially responsible if we do nothing. If we don't require any home inspections and we do nothing and we don't go anything to look at a home, I think that the more that we do and the more proactive we are in trying to keep kids safe and that we can show how proactive we are in keeping kids safe, I think it puts us in a better position. But I don't know of anything that we can do in this area that's going to keep us from being potentially responsible. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I wouldn't expect, I would hope that not everybody would think that we would be guaranteeing the protection of their children at the daycare that's registered, but I just wanted to make sure that the city was going to explain that, probably fairness to the people who sign up. Okay, and then another thought, if you could bear with me, is if a daycare provider was given a complaint was issued for that daycare provider for some hazardous material or who knows what, but either way, a complaint was issued. It seems like maybe just reasonable and fair that if that daycare was issued a complaint by the city, that every individual who had a child at that daycare should be somehow notified of that complaint, and either in a written form and or sign off on a document that says, I've read this, I understand this happened, I know about it, and I'm continuing to bring my kids here. Is that going too far?
I assume you're talking about a substantiated complaint where
Right.
we've found it to be true. We are wrestling with that what we think is the best method. Certainly posting that inspection, which will have the corrective action for any deficiencies written right on it, would be the one method. Then we have to help educate parents to look for those inspections and to be able to read that corrective action. The other would be as if we have to issue a citation, then we would require that citation to be posted on the door of the premises. So for example, they're an unregistered provider and we determine we should issue a citation regarding that, that would be required to be posted on the door. And that we can do with existing ordinance. We don't have to make any changes to our ordinance to require that. So, yes, as far as how to assure that parents who are busy and they're coming and going and racing off to this event or that after work and getting their kids home, and that's always going to be the challenge. It'll be a work in progress. But we are only as good as the daycare provider also agreeing to do that. And I think the ones that are going to be responsible are going to make sure their parents do see that information and are well informed. We would work with them as closely as we can. If we're not seeing good change happen with this and good information being able to be shared, and we'll try to find evidence that this is working well, and if not, we'll look at other avenues to get that information to the parents.
I don't want to beat this in too hard, but the idea is almost like the audit committee. When they give us a report on analyzing a process that we're doing within the city, and they give recommendations, and then the administration usually responds with their corrective actions, it's almost as though the daycare provider should provide that same corrective response and or actions that they're doing to correct the situation. And that paragraph, all of that should be somehow made available to the parents. And if you're going to police it all the way through is my thought.
Sure.
All right. I'll leave it alone. Anybody else? Jill, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, we're good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
I have one comment. I would ask that the city attorney do something about the address of his people in his office, especially concerning the ties.
A tie, that was something.
That was something, wasn't it? Yeah.
He's been down to the county for a long time, I might add. So,
All right, very good, duly noted. And again, the Fiscal Committee meeting is canceled. We'll work on scheduling that. Chairman Brown will update us with that new date. Seeing nothing else, I'll adjourn the meeting.